season. That is really what we've got going on here with Ruth. We are moving out of the time of the judges. And I know you've heard Matt teach about the judges and all the terrible things that the judges did and how things end so poorly. So you get Joshua, Judges, and then Ruth. And Ruth is kind of this book that is a sea of tranquility, an island of tranquility in a sea of so many other issues and problems. Our new sermon series is called Homecoming, and there's several homecomings in this. And in the middle of that, we have Dan Brown coming home to be able to preach his last sermon that he never got to preach. I told him we could come when COVID was over. So maybe we'll be close enough to taking masks off by then. It would be great by the 14th of November to at least have them be non-mandatory. But it is a great story, and I'd like us to get into it now with the first chapter, and it really just establishes the setting. But there are lots of great details in this story. So it says, in the days when the judges ruled, it kind of sets the tone. This is where we are in the days when the judges ruled, and there was mess after mess after mess with the judges. There was a famine in the land. They had supply chain issues. And they were trying to get things together. And a certain man of Bethlehem, what do you know about Bethlehem? You've heard of Bethlehem before. That's part of the story, right? Bethlehem, there's a famine in Bethlehem, which is ironic because Bethlehem means house of bread, house of food, house of meat, depending on the translation. So you kind of get this juxtaposition that here we are in the word that means plenty, and there is a famine in Bethlehem of Judea. And a certain man in Bethlehem of Judea went to live in the country of Moab. We'll talk more about Moab in a minute. He and his wife and two sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi, and the names of his two sons were meant to rhyme, Mahlon and Chilion. And they were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah. They went into the country of Moab and remained there. But Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died. This is a great way to start a story, okay? The seemingly main character dies, and the main character of this story is Naomi. There are two books of the Bible that are named after women, right? Ruth and Esther. Those are the two. And here we're going to spend a little time in Ruth for the month of November. They went into the country of Moab and remained there, but Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her two sons. These sons took Moabite wives. They married women who were there, and there are some prohibitions later against marrying foreign wives, but they were probably not in place at this time. The name of one was Orpah, and the name of the other was Ruth. So who do you think they were married to? You would think that, Orpah was married to Mahlon and Ruth was married to Chilion, but it's the reverse. It's set up in the story thinking, this one, then this one, then this one, then this one, but you find out later in the chapter, it's the reverse. When they had lived there about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died. So that the woman was left without her two sons and her husband. This is the setup for the entire story. Okay, they go to Moab because they're chasing food. They're looking for a place to be able to eat, and they go there and they have 10 pretty decent years there, but then the husbands that they marry die, and this is where we come into our dilemma. So where's Moab? I know that's what you've been asking and thinking about, Moab. Over and over again in the text, you hear it, and Matt pointed this out in a sermon that I was able to listen to. He said it's Moab, 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 Moab. So just take a look at that. They want you to know that they're in Moab, okay? And then it's about 10 years when the tragic death of both the husbands happened. So in a sea of, there's been war and threat of war, trickery and treachery among brothers and sisters, genocide, brutal reprisals, disobedience, unfaithfulness. All these things are happening when the judges ruled. And you remember how Judges ends. In those days, there was no king in Israel, and all the people did what was right in their own eyes. That is what we're living into here. We're living into a time when everyone was doing right in their own eyes, and sometimes things don't change. And we get to the origin story of Moab, which is not a pretty story. And Nathan, can you move a couple slides there? So we're going to go to the origin of Moab, which comes from the book of Genesis, and it's not a pretty story. How many of y'all remember how Moab and Ammon got their names? You won't forget it now, okay? Now, Lot, you remember Lot's leaving Sodom and Gomorrah, and Lot's wife turns back and becomes a pillar of salt. So Lot's wife has died, just as the husband of Naomi has died. And so Lot went up out of Zoar and settled in the hills with his two daughters, for he was afraid to stay in Zoar. So he lived in a cave with his two daughters. And this is where it gets dark. And the firstborn said to the younger, our father is old, and there is not a man on earth to come into us. Got it?
Got it. There's no pun in that.
There, yes. Our father is old, and there is not a man on earth to come into us after the manner of all the world. This is in your Bibles, friends. Okay. Come, let us make our father drunk. Let us make our father drink wine, and we will lie with him so that we may preserve offspring through our father. It's in your Bible. Okay. This is the stuff that, people sometimes don't realize is there and haven't really read. And these are the origins of Moab and Ammon. So they made their father drink wine that night, and the firstborn went in and lay with her father. He did not know when she lay down or when she rose. On the next day, the firstborn said to the younger, look, I lay last night with my father. Let us make him drink wine tonight also. How much wine would he have had to drink? Right? Let us make him drink wine tonight also. Then you go in and lie with him so that we may preserve offspring through our father. So they made their father drink wine that night also. Think about the desperation of these women. And that's really kind of the setup for the whole book of Ruth. I mean, the whole book of Ruth is a story of desperation, of women who are widowed, of women who are left alone without a male relative, without anyone to be able to care for them, without anyone to be able to help them in that day and age. And so they are the most marginalized. They are the poorest of the poor. They are the ones most in need. And that is the story of what happens with Naomi and Ruth and Orpah. So they made their father drink the wine, and the younger one rose and lay with him. And he did not know when she lay down or when she rose. Thus, both daughters of Lot became pregnant by their father. The firstborn bore a son and named him. Got it now? Will you forget that ever? Okay. He is the ancestor of the Moabites to this day. The younger also bore a son and named him Ben-Ami. He is the ancestor of the Ammonites to this day. So now we have a picture of Moab and Ammon, and where you'll be able to see the kingdom of Ammon on the top there, the kingdom of Moab there in the purple, and down in the bottom, near the bottom of the Dead Sea, you see where Zoar is. So you've got Israel on one side of the Jordan, and you've got these settlements, these kingdoms on the other side. And so they must have been desperate to cross the Jordan to be able to search out food, because there wasn't food on their side of the Jordan. And, Israel is supposed to be this land flowing with milk and honey. And you might remember that flowing with milk and honey, they're flowing with milk and honey is a way to tell you they have a good water source. You can't have great milk without a good water source for the cattle. You can't have great honey without a great water source for the bees. And so it's a land flowing with milk and honey. And you can see that this is modern day Jordan. Anybody been to Jordan? I'd love to go, Scott. I haven't gotten to go. I'd love to be able to go at some point. And so there's a lot of wordplay in this story. Naomi, her name means sweet. I've heard it defined as sweetheart, pleasant one. Other ones call it above all or beauty, but there's a sense that she is sweet and pleasant. And so that is how Naomi is defined. And then there are other definitions of names here that I just like to share with you. Elimelech I read in one place where they said his name was "My God is kind." And this is how things get into trouble, because one author wrote that his name is "My God is kind," but everywhere else that I went and looked told me that his name means "My God is king." My God is king. And so somebody messes something up, and then you retell the story and you retell the story and you retell the story. So if I'd only used the first source, I'd be thinking, my God is kind. And there is that juxtaposition, because it doesn't feel like God is very kind to Naomi, just like the poor widow in our story from last week. The other names there: Moab is of his father, Ben-Ami, son of my people. Malon perhaps means sickness. Other sources have said it comes from a word to dance. Chilion means destruction or wasting. And sickness and destruction sort of makes sense in the midst of this story. And then Orpah might mean fawn or the nape of the neck. And another was because she turned back. And you'll see that in the story, because she does turn back. And so sometimes the definition of the name comes from what happened in the Hebrew scripture, not beforehand. So sometimes the name comes to mean something later because of what happened in the scripture, as Ruth's name means companion or with bread. And compassionate friend, and that's what she turns out to be. So I think sometimes when they talk about the name derivations, it's not what the original name meant, it's what the name came to mean because of what happened. And most of you know that the name Orpah was messed up because they really didn't understand that was supposed to be her name, and they started calling this woman Oprah, which is just a misspelling of Orpah. Okay. Her family, unfamiliar with the name, pronounced it and spelled it Oprah from her infancy, though it remains Orpah on her birth certificate. After the Reformation, a few Protestant parents discovered Orpah as a name. And in the 1850s, Michael, 105 Orpahs were born. Orpha then, O-R-P-H-A, was much more common. 2,156 of those were born in 1850. And they're all just, and then a few parents named daughters Oprah after Oprah's Winfrey's fame. 37 Oprahs were born in 1987. But people decided, once you get a name like Cher, that, is the one word name, Beyonce, once that name becomes so popular, they decide your kids are going to be teased and they don't name you that anymore. So the name Oprah has fallen out of fashion. The other name that you'll see is that they were Ephrathites. Ephrathites were descendants of Ephra, who lived in around the city of Bethlehem. It was also called Ephra. And I'm from Pennsylvania, and we had a place called Ephrata. Anybody ever been there? And it was there was a cloister there where the group was against marriage, and so they died out. It just didn't go well for them. But you might also hear the term Ephra in Micah, the second chapter, about the ruler from Bethlehem, that there's a prophecy about the ruler from Bethlehem. But you, O Bethlehem of Ephrathah, who are one of the little clans of Judah, from the least of these, from you shall come forth for me one who is to rule in Israel, whose origin is from of old, from ancient days. And then you can also see the importance of this book in the genealogy. In the genealogy in Luke, they go through all the men, but in the genealogy in Matthew, they include women in the genealogy. And here you see in this genealogy, and Boaz by Rahab, and Boaz, the father of Obed, by Ruth. And so Ruth is included in the genealogy of Jesus in the book of Matthew. And in fact, the book of Ruth ends with a genealogy as well. So you look forward to that as we study the third and fourth chapters 2 weeks from now. So we have three women alone, three young widows who in those days could only find any sense of security through marriage. And they're stuck. This is how the story is set up. They're stuck and everyone's on the edge of their seat, I can tell, wondering what's going to happen to these women. So we go on with the 6th to the 10th verses, and they let us know we're talking about Moabites again. Did you get that? Moabite women. Then she started to return. So she becomes the main character. Then Naomi started to return with her daughters-in-law from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the country of Moab that the Lord had considered his people and given them food. So she's heard that the famine that had driven them out of Bethlehem 10 years earlier, at least, has now, it's become a land of plenty again. And because of what God has done, there's a couple times you'll see it as you read the book of Ruth. God intervenes there and does something. The Lord has considered his people and given them food. So she set out from the place where she had been living, she and her 2 daughters-in-law, and they don't know exactly how far they got along on this journey. Had they gone a long way? Had they gone a short way? They set out on this journey to where she had been living, and she and her 2 daughters-in-law, and they went on their way to go back to the land of Judah. And these phrases are just, I think it's 9 times you hear return, turn, go back, return, turn, go back. This is a story about going back home, at least for Naomi. They went back to the land of Judah. And Judah is important because of the rest of the prophecy and all those kind of things. But Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, here's the word is again, go back, each of you to your mother's house. And this is a phrase that only gets used like one other time. This is not a phrase that you hear a lot. Usually you would hear go back to your father's house, but here it's go back to your mother's house. And this may just be maybe adding insult to injury in the story, Bill. I mean, this is like go back to your mother's house because your fathers are dead too. Moab must have been hard on the men who lived in that area. The dad dies, the 2 husbands die, and their own fathers may be deceased as well. And that's one of the reasons she says, go back to your mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. And this is more than just kindness. This is hesed. This is God, this is what God offers to us, that sense of faithfulness and loving kindness. So may God offer you that hesed, that loving kindness that you have so lovingly offered to me. And she leaves them with a blessing. This is really a parting thing. This is like goodbye. Okay, we're done. You need to go home. You need to go back where things are going to be better. At least if you stay here in Moab, there's going to be hope for you. But if you follow me back to my homeland, this is a dead end for you. So don't even think about it. Go back, each of you, to your mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. It's a very gracious blessing. And then she prays over them. The Lord grant that you may find security, each of you in the house of your husband. Because that was really the only way to get security, was to have a man who would provide for you. Then she kissed them and they wept aloud. And they said to her, no, we'll return with you to your people. And then Naomi I think it's funny. I mean, I think Naomi's like, you guys have got to see the humor of this. You 2 young women can't stay with me. So Naomi says in verse 7, turn back, my daughters. Here it is again. Go back, turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Do I still have sons in my womb that they may become your husbands? I mean, think about how ridiculous this is. And you ever get to that point where, things are just so bad, you have to laugh? I mean, things have just gotten so bad. You've made such a mess of things. You just have to stand back and kind of see the humor in things and be able to take stock. And I think this is where Naomi is. She's just like, turn back, because I cannot regrow sons for you so you can marry another and marry back into my family. Turn back, my daughters. Go your way, for I am too old to have a husband, even if I thought there was hope for me. And she's probably 42. Just want to, lay that out there. She's probably about 42. For I am too old to have a husband. even if I thought there was hope for me, even if I should have a husband tonight and bear sons, would you then wait until they were grown? Do you feel the humor in this? I mean, I think it's just a great scene. Would you refrain from marrying? No, my daughters, it has been far more bitter for me than for you. So this woman who has been sweetness has turned bitter. It has been far more bitter for me than for you. I've had all these terrible things happen. You're young, you still have another chance. And she's encouraging her daughters-in-law to remarry after the death of her boys, which I think is a very loving thing to do. It must be hard. I don't know if any of you have ever had to be in that situation where your child, someone in your life has lost a spouse, and encouraging them to remarry has got to be has got to be loving kindness. It's been far more bitter for me than for you, because the hand of the Lord has turned against me. And this is certainly the lowest point of the story. This is where I think she was able to laugh for a minute, and now she gets deadly serious because she feels like the hand of the Lord has turned against her. It's not what the narrator is saying. It's not what the narrator is saying about her. It's what she's saying about herself. She feels like in this moment of heartfelt frustration that the Lord has turned against her. And so they weep again. Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. Orpah is got it. I mean, she's heard it, and she realizes that her mother-in-law has set her free. Her mother-in-law has said go, and there's no harm, no foul. It is the right thing for Orpah to do. But Ruth goes beyond any sort of level of what should be expected of her. Even if what Naomi said is not true, people often feel that way. And I know this: God can take our anger and frustration when we have it. And so we go to verse 15 and 17. So Naomi said, see, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. I mean, back to her people and to her gods. This is important, because then Ruth is saying, I want to be part of your people and your God. I'm willing to convert. I want to be a righteous Gentile. I'm willing to push all in. I'm willing to pledge everything to you, not just my loyalty to you as a person, but my loyalty to your gods. And I will go with you until you die. And by saying I'll go with you until I die, your people will be my people and your God, my God. I'll be buried, till death parts me from you. Even if death parts me from you, wherever, if she's going back to the homeland, she knows that Naomi's going to be buried there in her homeland. And these are the famous words. Anybody have them at their wedding? Entreat me not to leave you. Do not press me to leave you or turn back from following you. We usually skip that when we do it at a wedding. We skip those first verses. Do not press me to leave you or turn back from following you. We start here. Where you go, I will go. Whither thou goest, I will go. Maybe how you've heard it. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die. There will I be buried. I'm willing to give up everything. I'm willing to give up my homeland to follow you. May the Lord do thus and so to me, and even more, if even death parts me from you. And now we sort of get the end of this. Now, when Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more to her. She had pleaded her case. She'd used humor. She'd given a blessing. She had prayed over her. She did everything to say, you can let go. But Ruth was willing to go beyond what custom had required, what tradition, what law required out of love. So the two of them went on until they came to Bethlehem. And this is kind of a treacherous journey across, some rough land. And that's just like The two just made it across, no problem. They got back to Bethlehem. When they came to Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the women said, "Is this Naomi?" And why do you think they said, "Is this Naomi?" She'd had a rough life. She'd had a rough life. I once made the most terrible mistake of talking to two women. And, sometimes you'll see a younger and older woman together. And I might say something to the older woman like, "Is this your sister?" Right? You try to be funny and you say, "Is this your sister?" Well, these two women were sitting together and I did it the wrong way. I said, "Is this your mom?" Turned out to be her twin sister. That was not good. It was not good. Okay. So, Naomi had a rough 10 or 12 years. They hadn't seen her for a long time. And they say, "Is this Naomi?" As they get back there to Bethlehem, the house of bread, the house of meat. And she says, "I've been through a lot." And she says to them, because she has been in the pit of depression, she has been in this time of self-pity and feels like God is against her. And she said to them, "No longer call me Naomi, but call me Mara," which means bitter. So she wants to even change her name to name the bitterness that she's been living, to name the bitterness that she's been chewing. She's willing to make that her identity. I'm not sweet anymore. My life is bitter and I'm going to be bitter. For once again, this is what God has done to her. "For the Almighty has dealt bitterly with me. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has dealt harshly with me and the Almighty has brought calamity on me?" Mara, it means bitter. And we've seen this before where someone gets a new name. You see it happen throughout the Old Testament where someone gets a new name, but usually it's a positive new name. It's not a negative new name. And when you're in that time of depression and when you're so down, you can't see a way out and you keep digging. And it's what she seems to be doing. She just keeps heaping the bitterness upon herself, and she keeps blaming God for all that has transpired. And then it ends like this. "So Naomi returned with Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, who came back with her from the land of Moab." You got to know that Ruth is from Moab, that Ruth is an outsider. She is not one of us. She's not one of our people. And it's said over and over and over again. But what a beautiful thing that the lineage of King David, and thus also the lineage of Jesus, has a woman who is an outsider, and that outsider woman is able to bring forth kings. Bring forth a lineage of kings. And I think it's a reminder to all of us. I think it was a reminder to the Hebrew people of some of their ethnocentrism, of some of the way they were so much about themselves, to say that God's redeeming work is done through the world, not just through us. God's redeeming work is done through the world. And they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest, and you'll hear more about that next week. That's the setup. The barley harvest is set up for everything else that follows. So I hope you got a little bit of this beautiful story, just the beginning. You might want to go home and read all of Ruth if that would be helpful to you. But these are some of the questions that came to me as I was pondering this week. When have you found it most difficult to leave someone? When have you really wanted to cling to someone? When was there a time early in life that the decision you made had far-reaching implications that you could never have expected? Having Ruth cling to her and come home, Naomi could never have imagined all that would happen in the line of Ruth in the days and years to come. We're sitting here today because of the line of Ruth. When have you gone beyond what the law requires, beyond the call of duty, just as Ruth did? And have you ever felt like the hand of God has turned against you? Have you ever been that way? Have you ever felt like Naomi did? And how did you handle it? It might be a gift for someone else at your table who is struggling with that right now. And what do we really believe about the Lord bringing calamity upon us? What do we really believe about that? Got it? Okay, discuss among yourselves. Thanks for listening to Ruth today.